name is Virgil Wood, and I'm delighted for us to have this opportunity to be together today. This Martin Luther King Jubilee Summit today is just 10 days from April 4, 2018, exactly 50 years to the day on April 4, 2018, when Martin Luther King left us. This is the 50th anniversary of his leaving, indeed, the Martin Luther King Jubilee. Before we start this morning, if we could just take a second to pause in silence and thanksgiving, as we are a community of memory and a community of hope, the beloved community. One of our very essential former workers in this whole movement, Dr. Linda Woodruff, went home this week to be with the Lord and her people. Owen Cardwell and Linda Woodruff integrated the schools of Lynchburg, a most courageous moment in the life of our city. And in honor of her life and the memory of her, we pause this moment. Thank you. This morning, we are most fortunate to have as our presenters, Dr. Owen Cardwell, Richmond, Virginia, who will address the subject of GPS for total success, the culmination of a long life of dedicated work in civil rights movement since the time he was 14 years old. At that time, I was a pastor in his home city, and our ties have grown deep and wide across those years. Following him at the end of those 30 minutes will be Dr. Hulbert, who will address the whole subject of empowering people in communities. Needless to say, our colleagueship and our friendship have grown deep as we've pursued the dream and our part of the answer to Martin Luther King's question, where do we go from here? Dr. Owen Cardwell.
Good morning, Dr. Wood, and good morning, all. It is a delight to be present and with everyone today. I'm taking a moment to pull my slideshow up. This has been a tremendous discussion starting on Friday morning with Dr. Howard Stevenson from Harvard University. And I'm delighted to be included in the group. Just after the election of Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States, Dr. Otto Scharmer, who is a professor at MIT and developer of Theory U, wrote that we are at a watershed moment, not just in America, but in the world. And he defined the watershed moment as a moment that could help us wake up to a deeper level of collective awareness and renewal, or a moment when we could spiral down into chaos, violence, and fascism-like conditions. Whether it's one or the other depends on our capacity to become aware of our collective blind spots. And I think that he adequately described that we are at a critical juncture. He defined this collective blind spot in the fact that it reflects the paradigms of thought that have legitimized three major divides. He identifies the economic divide, the political divide, and the cultural, spiritual divide. I love this quote from Unbounded Spirit. We're all humans, unless race disconnects us, religion separates us, and politics divide us, and wealth classifies us. So we're at this critical juncture in in our lives and in the life of America, in the life of the world, where we've got some decisions to make that will impact us from this day forward. Interesting thing to me is that we are discussing where we go from here. The same question that was left to us by Dr. Martin Luther King, and we know that we're just days away from observing the 50th anniversary of his being taken away from us. In 1968, he was launching the Poor People's Campaign, and in 2018 we find young people converging on Washington and young people gathering all over the world, marching for our lives in terms of gun violence. And it seems like the more things change, the more they remain the same. So this question about where do we go from here is a very pregnant question for us today. Let me get back to this idea about the blind spot that Sharma raises. He identifies the blind spot as that part of our seeing that we usually don't see. It is that inner place or source from which a person or a social system operates. So it's that inner place from which we operate. It's that gut level kind of place. It is the source. It is kind of who we are, and because of who we are, it determines how we process things and what the result of that process generally looks like. But the great news is that that is not the whole story. We've got pockets of hope, pockets of uplift that are taking place all over this country, all over this world. And what I see happening in these few days that we are gathering together in this Martin Luther King Jr. Jubilee Summit is that we are identifying some of the things that have been working. We are identifying people that have been in the trenches, and we're bringing together this think tank. We don't just want to think about it. We want to make sure that we are operationalizing many of the aspects that are taking place in various places all over this world. So where we start from is this. We understand that we live our lives as narratives. We are each living a story of our own making. It's referred to as life stories. And these life stories consist of not just one long story, but a series of stories, very often a series of associated discourses that explains and chronicles the connections between them. And these stories are told by individuals that satisfy usually two criteria. The first criteria is that the stories associate discourses contained in our life story, and the stories and the associated discourses have extended reportability. So the idea is that we're not living these stories in a vacuum. Our stories are interconnecting with one another. And as we report those stories out, we find reflections of ourselves in one another's stories. Some say that we're actually performing these stories. And this whole idea of performance narrative is a performance is an act of intervention. It's a method of resistance, a form of criticism, a form of agency, a way of bringing culture and the person into play. And it situates that performance narrative within bigger discourses. For example, discourse of race or the discourse of gender, the discourse of the immigration discussion that's going on in this country, the discourse of the gun violence that's taking place. How are we situated within these various performances that are interconnecting with one another? And so Dr. Wood and I have been, as he said, colleagues for well over 50 years now. And the Lord has had us working for several years on a concept that we feel identifies what Virgil often calls America's predicament. And the predicament can be seen in various ways. I usually see the predicament as kind of a house that has doors and windows to it. And it's one predicament, but there are all kind of entryways into that predicament. And we have called it reversing the jail trail and jump-starting viable economies. So the problem is that these narratives that are being performed by many Americans that are impacted by the three divides, at least the three divides that Otto Scharmer identified, very often concludes in lifelong poverty or incarceration or death. And so the question before us is, how can we reframe and redirect these performance narratives so that we actually can reverse the jail trail and jumpstart a viable economy? In his book, In Love We Trust, Lessons I Learned from Martin Luther King, Dr. Wood talks about a continuum of what's happening along the economic pathway between the ghetto house and the jailhouse. And I thought that adequately describes the place where we find ourselves. In my dissertation, in my doctoral dissertation, I talk about reversing the jail trail, and Dr. Wood and I have talked about the back end of the jail trail, where we see people coming out of incarceration but still facing lifelong challenges because of a mistake or a couple of mistakes that they've made in their lives. And we talk about redeeming the middle, because this necessitates comprehensive work with men and women while they are incarcerated, but not just the men and women while they are incarcerated, but the impact that that has on their families and on the community in general. We are paying a serious price for the acts of mass incarceration that have taken over some of the dialogue in our nation. But just as important is work that needs to be done on the front end. And this is very often where we find ourselves. How do we connect with one another? How do we impact one another's lives? How do we connect our narratives so that we're keeping young people in particular from entering onto this pathway that leads them to problems that have them under the control of the social service system, engaged in miseducation, engaged in violence within our communities. How do we keep that from happening in the first place? And so Dr. Scharmer has come up with this this concept called Theory U. As you can see from this diagram, it's called Theory U because of the design that it has. But I want you to focus in on the bottom of this, where two existential questions have to be answered. And I really believe that this is the key to us providing a direction and a pathway to make sure that people are placing themselves in position for optimum success, for total success. Total success in individuals' lives means total success in the community's lives, and we really can then begin to realize the beloved community. So those two essential questions are, who am I and what am I called to do? Now, we call it a GPS for total success, and the GPS, as everyone knows, is really the acronym for Global Positioning System. And a GPS does two things. First of all, it identifies your current location, and it helps you to identify your ultimate destination. And the GPS then makes the process of connecting your current location with your desired destination. But the wonderful thing about the GPS is that it comes in various views. It allows you to be able to see a terrain view, which helps you to look at the landscape. How are things unfolding in front of you? It allows you to see a traffic view so that you can determine how the flow is taking place. it gives you a satellite view so that you can kind of move above your situation and look down upon it to make a determination about which direction to go. And it gives you a Google Earth view so that you're putting things in 3D detail so that you're able to provide more detail to the connection that you're trying to make. This idea of a GPS, it struck me, connected very well with something that was developed by a man named Joseph Campbell back in 1949. He gathered all of the hero stories from every culture and from every age up to that point, and he created something called the monomyth. The idea of the monomyth is that there is a commonality in all of our stories. He talks about how the hero ventures forth from the world of a common day into the region of supernatural wonder, and the hero comes from this mysterious adventure with power that he can then bestow upon his fellow man. And so in looking at Joseph Campbell's hero story, I realized that he has come up with a process whereby we might be able to identify the stages and the steps of common pathway that we all follow. Campbell was really looking at just one aspect of it, but when I really began to ratchet down, it came upon me that depending on how you navigate the journey could be described as a hero's journey, a victim's journey, or a villain's journey. And of course, a hero's journey ends, as Campbell describes. A victim's journey, the journeyer is returning consistently to a life of struggle, and the villain's journey is in the life of one who becomes a societal predator. Now, I am not trying to say that that person is not redeemable, but the story up to that point has them operating as a villain. I'm going to pass this screen for the moment. So the question becomes this: does a hero have to engage in each of the steps, or are some of the steps combined or even eliminated? The idea is that when we talk about framing the narrative that we're living, the narrative has to be both descriptive and prescriptive. It has to be attentional and intentional. Descriptive in the sense that it describes where we are, what we've gone through, how we have lived life, but prescriptive in the sense that the story is not finished yet. It allows us to be able to make a determination, just like when you go to a doctor and you tell your doctor what your condition is, he prescribes a medication or a process for you to be able to become healthy again. But it also has to be attentional. We have to pay attention to the details of our story, and it has to be intentional because we have to pay attention. We have to be intentional about how we operate, who we connect with, how we move forward in writing the future pages of our story. So when we go back to this idea of the heroic journey as a GPS, I've seen some theories that if you take them together and operationalize them in an interdisciplinary fashion and liken them to what takes place with the GPS, some interesting things present themselves for us. The terrain view and the traffic view are part of the heroic journey. The terrain view are the stages of the journey. It allows you to see the landscape. The traffic view are the steps of the journey. It allows you to see how things are moving. The satellite view is all quadrant, all level model that comes from Theory U. And the Google Map view is Theory U. Now we'll explore these in a little bit of detail, but it's taken me a lifetime to come to this point, so I can't put a lifetime of work in just 30 minutes of discussion. So in the terrain view, Joseph Campbell talks about the three stages of the journey. there's a departure or a call. It describes how the hero's journey is set forth. All of us has a calling in our lives. What are we called to do is very much part of the question that is before us. When we launch forth and seek to follow that calling, an initiation takes place. It deals with the obstacles that we have to overcome to get to where we're trying to arrive. And then if we are successful in navigating and negotiating those parts of the journey, and understand now, we have one extended journey that's called our life, but we have many journeys that take place within the course of our life. So we have many times that we are acknowledging a call, being initiated into that aspect of the call, and then we return from that particular journey with a boon that we can then share with our fellow man. And within these phases, these 3 phases, Campbell describes 17 identifiable steps. These are the steps. I don't have time to go into them right now, but they kind of represent the traffic view. We have this call to adventure. Sometimes we refuse the call initially, and there are ramifications from that. There's always some type of supernatural aid or some assistant who helps you in that journey. And then you have to cross this first threshold. It's kind of like the point of no return. When you cross that threshold, you're on that journey and you're moving forward, whether you like it or not. Sometimes we enter in that journey kind of kicking and screaming. And then we have these initiations that take place. We enter into the belly of the whale. We understand that via reference to Jonah and his struggles. We deal with these road of trials, their tests and ordeals. Very often we are crucified and we have to come forth with a new sense of life. An apotheosis takes place, a resurrection has to take place. And then we receive this ultimate boon once we there. Then there is the return. What do you do with this when you come back? Sometimes people refuse to return and they take a different pathway. But then when you return, then you recognize that you are the master of 2 worlds. You're the master of the world that you've just overcome, and you're the master of the world in which you are now engaging. And now you have the freedom to live, the freedom to truly be alive. And you know, it's wonderful because these things don't just take place at one place in our life, but they take place very often, many times in our lives when we are successful in navigating and negotiating this heroic journey. A guy by the name of Philip Zimbardo, who some might recognize as the developer of the Stanford prison experiment back in the early 1970s, he transformed the basement of Stanford University psychology department into an actual prison and hired college students, divided them up. Some were guards, some were prisons. And what he discovered was that he did not give the guards nor the prisoners a script. He simply gave them a role, and they performed the role according to how the experiment transpired. Well, very quickly, these guards took on an evil perspective in doing this, and Zimbardo ended up writing a book raising the question, why do good people perform evil deeds? Thank God, though, he did not stay there. He became also interested in why do people do heroic acts? And so he created something called the Heroic Imagination Project, understanding the nature of everyday heroism and the psychology of personal and social growth. And he talks about taking people and moving them from heroes in training to heroes in waiting. I think that Zimbardo has a lot to share in this discussion as we move forward. But now we move to this satellite view. So very often when we see people, we really identify people only by their behavior. The developer of choice theory, his name does not come to mind right now, but the developer of choice theory talks about total behavior. And he says total behavior is really not simply the acts that we perform, it's our actions, it's our thought process, it's our feelings, and it's our physiology. And I think that better describes. So when we see a person, we usually identify them by their behavior, but Ken Wilber created this Ockwall model to help us to understand that we're much more than that. That we're not just to be identified by our behavior, but behind our behavior, there is this, if you see this quadrant here in the upper left-hand side of the quadrant, it is the individual interior, or our thoughts, our beliefs, our values, the I of us. And so it is very often our thoughts and values and beliefs that help to create the behaviors. But that's not even the whole story, because we didn't come up with these thoughts and beliefs and values on our own. We came up because we are part of a collective. We are part of a collaborative. No man is an island. No man stands alone. And so our beliefs, our thoughts, our values come from the culture in which we were raised. It is identified as our collective interior, our family, our relationships, the neighborhood that we grew up in, the church that we belong to, even our racial identification has something to do with this idea of the culture that we are. But not only that, we make decisions, we act out in our behaviors because of the impact of social systems upon us, the laws, the transportation system, the social services, the government. So when one kind of backs up and takes a helicopter view of our relationships with one another, but also our relationship within ourselves, then we get a satellite view of our story. Sharma says that there are only two ways that we have of learning. We learn based on reflecting on our experiences of the past, and he calls this very often downloading. We see a situation, we say, I recognize this, and so we act, we observe on the situation, we reflect on what we did in the past, we make a plan, and then we act again. That's one way of learning. But Sharma suggests that there is another way of learning, and that is learning from the future as it emerges. And this spoke to me as a Christian, as a man of faith. It spoke to me about the concept of purpose and destiny, and a calling from the future that is pulling me along a trajectory. If I pay attention to that voice, it creates a different learning process for me. And so we're back to the you again. We have all of these parts of the you. But I want to stop right here in the sensing area, because in the sensing area, this is where we begin to have a sense of the journeys that we are involved in. But you remember I talked about the obstacles that we face on our journeys. Well, some of those obstacles are not necessarily tangible. They can be intangible. Voices that challenge us, voices that threaten us, voices of judgment, voices of cynicism, voices of fear. And if I move along this, you will see another screen where we see, though, on the bottom, this presencing, but in response to these voices, in response to the voice of judgment, one has to have an open mind. In response to the voice of cynicism, we have to have an open heart. In response to the voice of fear, one has to have an open will. And any of us that are living life, and I think that that's just about everybody on this webinar, we know that having an open mind, having an open heart, having an open will is not just done by saying it. There is a journey and a trial and a process that has to be identified in making sure that our open mind addresses these voices of judgment. Our open heart addresses these voices of cynicism. Our open will addresses these voices of fear. And then we have to look at the whole idea of authentic leadership. And authentic leadership I hear people talking a lot about servant leadership. I hear people talk about other kinds of leadership, but I think that authentic leadership really speaks to where we find ourselves in this watershed moment that Sharma identified. And the idea of authentic leadership is that you connect your passion to a purpose. You connect your behavior to your values. Your connectedness is in your relationships. Consistency is developed through self-discipline, and your compassion is tied into the condition of your heart. So we have a couple of practical examples of what we're doing in the church that I pastor and the nonprofit that I work with. For example, we have a program with our local jail, the Henrico County Jail. We go there every Sunday morning. We pick up men and women who are on work release. They need to be on work release because we don't want to have armed security in the church. They're on work release. We bring them. They worship with us. Once they've been with us for 4 weeks, they have an opportunity to bring their families there to worship with them. We engage in a family meal. We serve about 85, 90 people a Sunday in a family meal. And then afterward, they are engaged in a motherhood and fatherhood training. We're in the process of expanding that program to include resiliency training and some work on job preparation. But all of these are done with best practice models. And yes, churches can operate through best practice models. So we do pre and post tests. We utilize the trait hope scale and the scale of psychological well-being to determine the impact that we're having on these people. To date, we have served 145 persons, and only one person has recidivated out of that number. And then we're trying to make sure that we are creating the capacity for community leadership that we need. And so we have partnered with institutions of higher learning, something that we call the Faith-Based Leadership Institute. We're trying to help faith leaders to understand that community engagement is very different from evangelism. And so we work through the process of how can the faith community really begin to utilize all of the resources that we have, the people resources, and live out this idea of being part of the beloved community, and in fact, taking an active part in leading forth in the beloved community. Dr. Wood, I think that's all I have for now. So I look forward to hearing what Ryan has to say, and I look forward to the continued conversation.
Your publication very shortly when that comes. Thank you so much. Dr. Ryan Hulbert, Empowering People in Communities.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Owen. I always enjoy your enthusiasm and your really profound insights. I'm connecting with you from my home in rural Idaho, and I'm so grateful to be part of this program and feel it just a great privilege to be working with Dr. Wood and Brother Cardwell and all the others who are involved with this Jubilee Summit. I've had a wonderful career as a licensed psychologist and trying to use the gifts that I've been given to come up with innovative ways to better treat people with mental illness and also with substance abuse. But in the background, I've been working toward innovative prevention efforts. And that's the thing that I'm especially excited to share with you today, and that has largely been developed through my association with Dr. Wood and others. About 30 years ago, while finishing my doctoral program in clinical psychology at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, I had a profound peak experience that was very healing and motivating to me, that resulted in writing a brief theory called Connectedness Theory. I won't go into any detail on that, but it basically had to do with a lot of the things that Owen has just mentioned, of the connectedness of all of us. That led to a research fellowship at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium, where I was able to do my dissertation on alcoholics and time perspective. Time perspective has to do with how our self-concept and our motivation is impacted by our past experiences and our anticipated future. That led me to a position at the Cherokee Mental Health Institute, my first postdoctoral job. And there I met a psychiatrist, William Pettit, who taught me about a movement that's become known as the Three Principles. I wrote a book combining my experiences in those various sources of theory and so forth about 20 years ago, called The Sun is Always Shining. An early version of that book was given by Dr. Pettit to Dr. Wood, and that has opened up about a 20-year correspondence, and also a reprinting 2 years ago of the book with an endorsement by Dr. Wood. And since that time, Dr. Wood and I and Owen Cardwell and other associates with the National Jubilee Collaborative have become just very dear friends of mine. My assignment today is to share with you some of the thoughts and practical tools that could be available, if desired, to be part of this effort to help heal the soul of America. I'd like to begin by reading for you a brief true story that happened last July 2017. It's a miraculous rescue from a life and death situation that happened at a Panama City beach in Florida. Late in the afternoon, Roberta Ursary saw her two sons screaming for help from 100 yards out in the ocean. They had become caught in a strong current and were being carried out to sea. A nearby couple tried to rescue the boys, but they also got caught in the current. So members of the Ursary family dove in to rescue the struggling swimmers, and quickly 9 people were caught in the rip current. There were no ropes, there was no lifeguard. The police sent for a rescue boat, but the people had been out in the ocean struggling for 20 minutes and were exhausted, and their heads were slipping under the water. Among the onlookers on the beach was Jessica Mae Simmons. Her husband had the idea to form a human chain. They shouted at people on the beach to help them, and dozens of people linked arms and marched into the ocean. Jessica wrote, "To see people from different races and genders come to actually help total strangers was absolutely amazing to see." An 80-person chain stretched toward the swimmers. Everyone on the beach could only think of traditional solutions, and they were paralyzed. But one couple, in a split second, thought of a different solution. Innovation and creation are spiritual gifts, which give us access to inspiration so we can think of different solutions, different approaches, and different applications. Once that human chain was stretching for the swimmers, Jessica knew she could help. She said, "I can hold my breath and go around an Olympic pool with ease. I knew how to get out of a rip current. I knew I could get each swimmer to the human chain." She and her husband grabbed boogie boards and swam down the chain until they and another rescuer reached the swimmers, and then ferried them one by one back to the chain, who passed them to safety of the beach. Jessica had a distinct skill. She knew how to swim against the rip current. This true experience of rescuing those struggling and at the point of death illustrate the principles that I would like to share with you briefly today. These principles begin with the recognition of the solutions requiring the teamwork of others, the we, using our unique gifts, the me, and inspiration from God, the thee. Based on a lifetime of trying to help others, I believe that through working with others, everyone can become a hero. By doing something good, by using our unique gifts, and by developing resilience to not give up when the inevitable challenges come. Comparing solutions to serious individual, family, and societal problems to developing creative and healthy recipes, I believe the basic ingredients are consistent across those effective recipes. These are resilience in overcoming individual challenges, including addictions, holistic methods, including body, mind, and spirit, mindfulness in a peaceful state of being, unique individuals' spiritual gifts, basic family strengthening practices, and community mentors. I'd like to introduce you now to some possible tools which use the above ingredients. And these can be considered for use in the Beloved Community Initiative. As I mentioned, 20 years ago, I wrote the book, The Sun is Always Shining. When it was reprinted about 2 years ago, it contained an intro endorsement by Dr. Wood and a number of comments, including one by Dr. Cardwell. Dr. Cardwell, I'd like to read your endorsement, which is in the back of the book. Our moods, feelings, and emotions tell us something about our relationships with God. Dr. Ryan Hulbert has provided a guide by which we can process the meaning of the impact on our soul, mind, and spirit, and navigate toward wholeness. I would recommend The Sun is Always Shining to anyone who is serious about their spiritual development. Just last week, I received a copy of the Spanish version that's just come out. It also includes comments from Spanish-speaking people that have read the manuscript prior to being published. So I'm super excited about that reaching more people. While working for the Department of Juvenile Corrections for the state of Idaho, I knew that I couldn't use a Christian-oriented book, but knew the power of The Sun is Always Shining. And so I made an alternate version, youth-friendly, called Driver's Ed for the Brain. Here's a copy of what it looks like. Through immigrants and refugees here in the Boise, Idaho area, the little book has recently been translated into Arabic, Russian, and Spanish. And it's also about halfway through being translated into Swahili. It's been used in a variety of settings here locally, including juvenile detention centers, adult jails, an opioid dependency outpatient treatment program, and with hundreds of college students that I have in a course that I teach at Boise State University called Adolescent and Emerging Adulthood Development. Of the many comments gathered concerning the book, my favorite is from a 17-year-old teenage girl in a juvenile detention center. Let me read that for you. This was written in February 2017. I loved your book, Driver's Ed for the Brain. It really helped me open up my mind and calm down and think about, like when I get upset or angry, to calm down. Like the shifting gear part. Like when you dwell on your anger, you're sitting in first gear. And I've noticed I do that a lot. So when I'm free, I'm definitely going to work on shifting by using my mind and body. And I'd love a copy of the book. It's very useful. Maybe write another, but make it longer. When you can get a teenage girl or boy to want to read something even longer, I thought that was a great compliment. The subtitle of Driver's Ed for the Brain is Finding Greater Peace and Joy. A sequel, also a short little book called Growth Rings, has the subtitle Becoming the Person You Were Meant to Be. And it especially highlights how substance abuse and substance dependence detract from finding your true and heroic self. Also, while working at the Juvenile Corrections Department, I developed an object lesson highlighting the need for a combined approach in solving problems. It's a three-legged stool. I'd like to demonstrate it for you. It's actually a four-legged stool, I should say. It starts out with the seat of the stool with different components. Any effort in really helping people has to be able to get down to the person level. However, we know that the person is nested in the nuclear family and the extended family. And the family is supported by the community. Well, that's all well and good, but what happens if we're able to raise that whole system to a higher level? When that happens, all sorts of possibilities for solutions take place. 3 of those 4 legs are the biological, not just medications, but exercise, nutrition, so forth, proper medical and dental care. The social, various social skills, social supports, the psychological, educational development, self-esteem, so forth. Well, as I would use this with families and helpers and teenagers in the Juvenile Corrections Department, I pointed out the fact that so many helping systems work on the individual, but not necessarily enough with the family. If that family isn't strengthened along with the individual, here's what happens. The individual person literally falls through the cracks. So just another practical example of trying to show how all these various things are connected and necessary in producing meaningful change. Oh, I forgot to mention, you're asking where the 4th leg is. It's the spiritual. It's invisible, but it's actually underneath, holding everything up, and absolutely essential. Further, while working at the Department of Juvenile Corrections, I saw the need to help young people better understand how both character traits, individuals' inner strengths, and support team members, mentors are needed. And so I was able to produce a game called the Youth Support Team game. And 2 years ago, I was blessed to demonstrate this in Houston. Just very briefly, it's modeled after a football field. And the goal is to help young people reach happy and successful adulthood and not get driven back into jail and prison. And it uses a combination of support team members and also inner strengths, internal assets, and it's been very effective as a fun way of helping illustrate that need. And we've recently produced it through Chicago Game and Card to be ready for use if desired. About a year ago, it occurred to me that a number of these things that have been developed could be put into a developmental sequence for a heroic or a hero, everyday hero training program. Now, everyday hero is an ordinary person who does good things every day. And I entitled this program Roots and Branches. I'll show you the recently produced training manual. It includes pre and post assessments for individual growth, family growth, and community growth, and is a multi-generational holistic program. One of the pre and post assessment tools is called the Everyday Hero. It utilizes the acronym HERO for healthy physically, enlivened psychologically, resistant to substance abuse and media addiction, and O is other focused. Another one of the pre and post assessments is called the Everyday Hero, Everyday Family Hero, and it is a self-assessment using the acronym FAMILY, where the family together assesses how many times last week, how many days last week did we have fun together, affection, meals together. I is intelligence or learning something together. The L is really listening to each other. And the Y stands for yearning, or in other words, sitting down together and coming up with a goal of what they want to do at least one day more of those 5 previously mentioned dimensions. This is being piloted now in a residential treatment program for adolescent boys, and it includes a lot of the things I've already mentioned. The individual hero portion is roots and branches, or excuse me, is driver's ed for the brain, and then growth rings. Then they go into the family portion, and then they go into the community portion. There are various awards along the way. One of those, after they read and go through driver's ed for the brain, they get a certificate or a laminated picture of the road and a description of how to use it in terms of staying on the present and so forth. After they read growth rings, they get a laminated picture of the roots and the branches of a tree. And this is described in the book as helping us to realize, to become emotionally mature, we need to accept ourselves similar to the roots, stand up and be ourselves similar to the trunk, and then forget ourselves in the service of others. It's just a tangible reminder of what they've already learned in that. After they go through the family portion, they get a black walnut, which is described in their award as including the mind, like the little brain on the one side, and the heart, the portion that, or the shape that's on the other side. Anyway, there's a little dialogue that goes along with that that is my favorite object lesson to give people. They then play the game, which sensitizes them to the need to put a support team around themselves. We all need mentors. Owen and Virgil become key mentors in my life. Those mentors can be seen as different in different realms of our lives. For example, faith, community, recreation, education, our job, neighborhood. Once those people put that support team around themselves, or establish a support team, they're invited as the very last step of the 26 steps of Roots and Branches to contribute to a small community-specific book. This is a prototype from a town close by where I live, Cardwell, Idaho. And the young people, or could be older too, identify someone in their home community who they view as an everyday hero. They write a simple story, not a life story, but just a vignette, a brief story about something that that person has done. For example, here's a short one-pager of a young person who had, on a cold winter night, a heating and air conditioning man come and fix their furnace for a good price. He saw their sink was broken, fixed it for free, and became an everyday hero in that family's life. As these books are produced at no cost through Amazon, no cost in the production, then the young person becomes published, so to speak. The everyday hero becomes honored by being in the book. And then the last culminating award in Roots and Branches is a beautiful medallion that we minted for this process that, I'm not sure if you can see the picture very well. One side shows a man and a woman representing the heroic journey in each of us. Becoming our best selves is that heroic journey. Then the other side shows a tree with roots and branches. The roots represent the hearts of the parents and the extended family. The branches represent the hearts of the children. And there's a gap at ground level, represent all of us in the community standing in the gap to help unite the family. I think I'm just about finished with what I was hoping to share. Let me just look at my notes and see if there's anything else. I think that's it. Those are just some possible tools that are consistent with what we're trying to accomplish and could be considered. And I wanted to share those with you again, just as some practical examples of things that could be utilized. And so much appreciate being part of this, and just do whatever else you'd like me to do, Dr. Wood.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Hulbert, Ryan, and Owen. I think our listeners can get some sense that when we say that we can save every child on planet Earth, that's SECOPE. That's the dream that I have. That's my organization. Owen's is HADA, Heroes and Dreams Academy, and Ryan's is EPIC. And I think you've heard here today that we're not just blowing smoke on the restart of Martin's dream. We are ready to not just plant, but to harvest what we have been nurturing these 50 years, let's say. Now, the Jubilee National Collaborative is co-founded by Owen Cardwell and myself, Dr. Ryan Hulbert, and we have invited and have received many local and national entities that will be partnering and collaborating with us. In some cases, we will be doing joint venture things. In some cases, we will simply be encouraging and helping to resource other efforts that other people are working at. Martin Luther King, if he were here today, I believe there are at least two places he would be right now. One would be somewhere in Appalachia, maybe Welch, West Virginia. I'm not sure. I believe he would be in Flint, Michigan. I'm not sure, but I believe with all my heart, where the water has been poisoned and little children are having to drink poison in the water. How can a nation hold still with those kinds of conditions? And so the work that we are doing gives us the possibility of getting two kinds of people to the same table. One is the people who are way down under, bring them up to the level of the table. The people who are way up in the air with the resources concentrated in the hands of a few people. The resources, I read yesterday that the people who own more than a half of the wealth of the world could be gotten in one minivan. 8 people in one minivan have wealth equal to more than half of the whole population of the world. How can we stand still and not do something about that? How can we have an approach that honors the need to know how to do it? This is what you've heard now. Martin Luther King gave us why we must do it, then he was taken. And he's left to us to figure, how do we do it? So we stayed with the why, now we have the how. And we invite the listeners now to join in the conversation, discussion, as you like. The lines are open for those who would like to type in their question. There's a moderator who will receive your questions if you type them, or you can hold up your hand and be recognized and share your question, your comment, your amen, your hallelujah, or your baloney with our presenters.
Hi, this is Ralph Hall here. I have a question, I guess, beginning maybe with Owen. As a planner, I really like the analogy you have with the GPS kind of mapping the terrain, knowing your current location, looking forward to your final destination, navigating the landscape. I think that's a really sort of powerful way to sort of think about these sort of pathways forward, perhaps in a heroic journey way. So I sort of would like to learn more, hear a little bit more about that sort of the process that you've developed to work with students. And I mean, you sort of touched upon a lot of interesting ideas in your remarks, but is there anything else you could add about this combination, I guess, of this mapping with the heroic journey and what successes you've had and why those successes occurred? So
Thank you, Ralph. We have worked with approximately 300 youth in this what we call HADA process, and the idea is to introduce them to the concepts of the heroic journey, and very often we will take them to a movie, or we will play a movie, particularly a movie that involves a hero, and ask them, after we have shown them the treatment of the heroic journey, ask them to identify the aspects of it. That helps to make it real to them. And they're very often able to do that. And then they began to take on the language of the process themselves and began to identify how the heroic journey represents their own journey. They began to see aspects of that in their own journey. And we have, for one group, when we had some grant money, we even created T-shirts that said "Heroes in Training" and "Heroes in Action." Heroes in Training on the front side, and Heroes in Action on the back side, so that they could begin to really process that. We've even used it in adult correction facilities to help, particularly men. We work with men around this to help them identify how they can move from that victims or villains part that they have played up to this point and reframe that narrative. we find that the heroic journey in and of itself begins to take on greater import when we add to it the Aqua model and Theory U, because that then begins to help them to do a deeper dive into how to reframe that narrative moving forward. Just one final comment. We had one young man, we were having a leadership meeting at the church. We had one young man, someone knocking on the door, and people let him in. He came in and he shared with us, he had been with us approximately 3 years prior to that. He shared with us that now he was in college and married and had one child, all because of having gone through the process that we had shared with him. So we're finding it to be effective, and young people in particular identify with it very easily.
While we're waiting for the next question, I want to ask Owen to reflect further on this. I'm so excited about the ministry of New Canaan and the work you've done, Owen. It's just, it helps us to be able to say to people that what we tell you about the promise of Abraham and the promise of Jesus is real. And we're able to take people that everybody else has given up on. Take the case of the man in the cemetery who had been given up on all of the institutions of his setting, and in one day his life get turned around. Or the rich man up a tree who had been so rejected by everybody that he was banished himself up the tree. And in one day, Jesus gets him out of the tree to eye level with the man that comes out of the cemetery. I think the implications for the faith communities are so powerful here, because we are often selling ourselves as being able to help people turn troubled lives around. They try us out, and in time they discover that we have not really gone far enough into the process of helping them to know how to do it, how to recognize, small steps in the right direction, and therefore they give up. And I think that what you've done on it is going to rekindle the possibilities of churches having credibility with people who need them the most.
Let me just say a bit about how Ryan has helped me, particularly the board game that he identified. Ryan introduced me to the Search Institute's 40 developmental assets, which the game is based on. And we have shared, we've used the game, we've given the game away to a number of people across the state. But the whole idea of the developmental assets, 20 of those assets have to do with creating an incubator, a network, support system. Very important support system includes the family and the community. And I think that has great facility, again, in understanding that we're all part of a collective. And then the other 20 assets have to do with internal assets. Search Institute did a study, a survey of about 5,000 young people that have gone through their process. And they identified that if a young person has 30 of those 40 assets in play, they're less likely to be involved in risky behavior. Even those that have gone through the Search Institute process themselves, on average, only have 19 of those. I was working with a school district, a very poverty-induced school system in Danville, Virginia, and the teachers and administrators said they would be surprised if their kids had 6 of those operating. And so by the Search Institute's estimation, we're doing a terrible job of protecting our children.
Right. Other questioners, comments?
This is Ralph again here. Another thought I had was, what I would like to sort of think about, and it may not be possible to do it now, but how do we bring together the work of Save Every Child on the Planet, the Heroes and Dream Academy, and an Epic. Like, how do we sort of tease out how to work together? This is open to anyone. Have you had any experience in the past where you've been able to bring together organizations and groups around a common vision, and how did you do that?
Well, that's the mission of the Jubilee National Collaborative. Right now, I believe we could say at the table, there are probably about 4 national bodies who have made a commitment to this model. And then in our local communities, I think it would be very helpful for Ryan and for Owen to give you a deeper shot against this backdrop. The work of Martin Luther King, I like to call it the front yard work. He never got to the backyard. The backyard is, suppose you drew a circle, a radius of about 50 miles around your center, and say everything within this radius of 50 miles is what we're concerned about. And so you're looking at how do you bring together those various organizations, persons, and institutions. Let me cap it off by saying something that one of our colleagues who is a part of this network, Dr. Russell Quaglia, said some years ago. We were together when the Columbine happened, and the president at the time, Bill Clinton, said nationally that what we need is a national White House summit. And our colleagues said, no, we don't need a national White House summit. We need a kitchen table summit in every home. And I think that what we are hearing here is the possibility of a kitchen table summit. And I would add to that something that we worked on. We call it Circulio, Communities in Recovery, Communicating, Understanding, and Loving Each Other. Circulio is a 13-step process like the 12-step model that we intend to initiate in each community so that every week people are coming together around one of those steps and sharing with each other this journey. And what you've heard here from both Owen and Ryan feed really central to those kinds of prospects. So you have things going on within institutions, you have things going on within each home. Maybe that's like the Sabbath. It's that one time in the week when the family ought to be together as a family, that meal that Ryan talked about. And maybe some dialogue around what is it that this family needs to be concerned about this week as a family. What can we celebrate and what must we be concerned about? But I will wrap my comment off with what Martin said often. He said in 1961, and he said it again on the night that he was taken from us. He said in 1961, I've been so busy dealing with the universality of our predicament that I have not been able to deal with the particular communities. And then he went to Chicago to try to do that, but we got bogged down into some things there. We were trying to do things much too fast, and we did not have the pacing that these 50 years have allowed us now. And especially as we go forward, let's claim the next 7 years as the next battleground for launching these things. And there are some specific initiatives that are going to answer your question, Ralph, and some of that you are very much a part of. I want to do a shout out to Virginia Tech, Virginia Polytechnic Institute at Blacksburg, and with campuses in Richmond and Washington, for the enormous input that you have made, and to Virginia Union, my alma mater. And our design is to bring together church, town, and gown around a very carefully laid out plan that people know where they get on, what is expected of them, but they have to answer those questions themselves. But I would like for Owen and for Ryan each to talk a bit about the more specific, that 50-mile radius and what's inside of that is already a part of your gatherings.
Thank you. I'll jump in if I could. One thing that I've been pushing hard for the last couple of years here in my local area is a prototype community center, which I describe as Center for Abundance. And in this case, center is not a noun, but it's an action verb. In other words, center for abundance. And it is a multi-generational, cross-cultural, interfaith, creative art center. And art, in this case, is used very broadly. Could be anything from quilting, painting, rock polishing, mechanics, art of camping, fly fishing. It would be staffed by volunteers who have something to share, a talent and a passion, typically older people who have the time. And the recipients would be anybody, but especially young people who need to broaden their array of interests beyond texting, to interact with hands-on skills taught by mentors. You can even do artwork with people you can't speak the same language. So I've become a nonprofit organization to promote this idea, and it's just in its fledgling stages. But picture these, in many cases, lonely, unvalued older people who have so much to share, and passing those values and skills on to young people, and having those new interests of the young people turn into hobbies, turn into skills, turn into jobs, and then readily making available the information about how they could take those interests and skills to the next level of training in technical schools or other areas of training. So it becomes an economic growth model based on those initial interests that are piqued by having people with passions sharing those with young people. So this is at 50 mile, it just matches your statement, Brother Virgil. The 50-mile radius would be a catchment area to bring those people together. It could be easily replicated in an old barn in a rural area, an empty Kmart in an urban area, and it would take on the flavor of the community. For example, here in my area, about 25% Hispanic. There would be, Hispanic relevant things, dances and music, certain times of the month. Other places might have a higher refugee community with African cultural things to share and so forth. Anyway, that's a practical model that is separate from roots and branches, but I think could really be a synergistic type of thing to bring people together of different walks of life.
We have three models that we think can be replicable and can work in any locality. The first one is the one that I mentioned, bringing inmates from local jails to the church. Local sheriffs are elected officials, and so they have a lot of authority that they can exercise, and many of them are becoming the repositories for what our sheriff says, people that we're afraid of or people that we don't like. And that's being reflected right now in the opioid crisis. I could have more to say about my disdain for that concept, but these are the cards that we have to play with right now. And so communities can't figure out how to deal with this crisis. But most of the people that we bring to the jail, from the jail to the church, have had drug addiction issues. And as I indicated, we're seeing huge success with them. That's a model that can be utilized in any local community in partnership with the local jail. The other model that we lift up is this Faith-Based Leadership Institute for Community Engagement. Even if you don't have a university or college in your community that can do this, because we are in the age of distance learning, all you need to have is people in one room with a facilitator, and the presentations can be sent like we're doing now with this webinar. And so the Faith-Based Leadership Institute for Community Engagement has great potential to bring faith leaders within any particular community all to the table at the same time, identifying not only their local issues, but what strengths they bring to bear. And again, we do this because many times we've got churches on every street corner, and many times these churches are underutilized during the course of the week. They have space, they have people that are available that could be mobilized to address many of these issues. And then finally, Dr. Wood, you and I have been talking for a long time, and we're rapidly developing a collective impact framework that we're calling the after-school school system. There are elements of that can be brought in from the different partners that we have working with us in this Martin Luther King Jubilee Summit. And an after-school school system might not look the same in every community, but the idea is that all the collaborators within that community are operating from the same page with a backbone organization that is responsible for tracking the data and making sure that there is impact that's taking place.
Now, Owen, I was just made aware last week of a development that is troubling. A group of inner city churches were working with a certain local community entity, and they were put out, and a right-wing fundamentalist group was brought in to work with these children. And a lot of people don't even know that story. In this own place, with all of the resources around us, we have allowed in this one spot to our children, again, to be taken over by people who have shown how much they disdain them by the way they have voted this year. I don't want to say more about that, but it just makes my blood boil. But I know we've got to let our anger cool down from red to blue so we can be as smart as you and Ryan are showing us how to smartly and coolly get important stuff done. But the whole thing that King said was that we are so busy rattling our saber with the federal government and these big national issues and stuff that we have totally ignored the little people and the big people back in the neighborhood. And I'm just delighted that, you know, people are finding each other who've been doing things. I used to ask the question, does Martin have a legacy? And I thought maybe he didn't, but what's happening now is that people who have been working quietly over the years are now finding each other. And our Jubilee National Collaborative is one of those entities through which we can strengthen each other and learn from each other as we go. Well, it seems that maybe we have no more questions or comments. I would like to say to any listening audience that we invite your feedback, whether you agree with us or not. One of my professors in seminary, homiletics professor, Dean Vaughn Dabney, used to say that, I know it was Roy Pearson who used to say, the president used to say, at the end of a sermon, people should be invited to say either hallelujah or baloney. And I just want to make it clear that in our deliberations, we accept both hallelujah and baloney. And we believe that we will learn together how to go forward beyond hallelujah and baloney. If there are no further comments or questions, We certainly want to thank our presenters, Dr. Owen Cardwell, Dr. Ryan Hulbert, and yours truly. We assure you that this is an ongoing process. You may reach us through the addresses that are available there on screen. And our next presenters are listed, and we invite you to join us again tomorrow morning at the same time and the same place. Thank you and good day.